Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Tessa tells Sharon the big news that Phyllis has. While Tessa Porter reveals the beans to Sharon Newman, Michelle Stafford's character Phyllis Summers will receive some very important news. Let's discuss what lies next on, as Kane Ashby will also need to strategically plan his next move. Initially, Kane will require time to reorganize following the dismissal of Michael Baldwin. Kane will need to find another method to neutralize Billy Abbott, even if he was hoping Michael would be his fixer. After learning of Michael's dismissal, Phyllis may offer to take over that task in its place. Phyllis might reassure Kane that he did the correct decision because she wasn't happy about Michael joining their team in the first place. In any event, Kane ought to have some significant news on Phyllis early. Because they need to maintain their close-knit hidden circle, Phyllis may pressure Kane to let her handle Billy and forego employing anybody else. Naturally, Kane will need to decide what to do next, particularly if he suspects that Victor Newman and Jack Abbott are plotting. Kane will undoubtedly learn that Victor and Jack are banding together against him at some point in the upcoming episodes. That might cause Kane to stir up trouble and attempt to turn the old enemies against one another. Sharon feels that more problems is coming and will shortly meet with Tessa. Tessa appears to be about to tell Sharon about her intention to look into the hotel where Mariah Copeland's spin-out began. Tessa will feel compelled to seek the whole truth and attempt to save Mariah and her marriage, even though Sharon will advise her to avoid jumping into anything too quickly. Tessa might admit that she has no idea what she's getting herself into, but she might also mention that Daniel Romalotti Jr. has consented to accompany her. If Sharon believes that Daniel and his clear feelings for Tessa pose a threat to Mariah's relationship, that can cause her to worry in a different way. The week in Genoa City is set to take a turn filled with betrayal, whispered alliances, and bombshell revelations as Tessa Porter decides to sit down with Sharon Newman and unload the truth about a dangerous piece of information that Phyllis Summers has been keeping close to her chest, a truth that could alter the course of several lives if it falls into the wrong hands. Tessa, who has been visibly torn between protecting Mariah Copeland and finding clarity about the spiral that began at the hotel, cannot hold her secret any longer, and Sharon becomes her sounding board in a moment that feels as much like a confessional as it does a warning. With Phyllis positioned at the center of yet another storm, she is about to receive life-changing news herself, news that may either fortify her next manipulative maneuver or pull her deeper into a web of enemies waiting for her to misstep. Sharon, while calm on the surface, cannot ignore the tremor in her gut that tells her danger is circling Mariah's marriage, and as Tessa speaks of Daniel Romalotti Jr.'s willingness to join her in this perilous investigation, Sharon senses another layer of threat entirely. The possibility that Tessa's search for answers may reopen Daniel's long-buried affections and throw a torch into Mariah's already fragile trust. Meanwhile, Kane Ashby lurks on the edges of his own unraveling plan, blindsided by Michael Baldwin's dismissal and furious that his carefully crafted moves have begun to collapse before his eyes. He must regroup quickly, searching for a replacement fixer to do the work that Michael has now abandoned, but just as panic starts to creep in, Phyllis slithers into the gap with the perfect offer. She'll take over Michael's role, insisting she can handle Billy Abbott better than anyone else, because if there's one thing Phyllis knows how to do, it's manipulate a man's blind spots until he trips himself into destruction. Kane, though initially skeptical, listens as Phyllis reassures him that dismissing Michael was the smartest play he could have made, especially since she never wanted Michael in their circle in the first place. Still, Kane cannot ignore the creeping dread that Jack Abbott and Victor Newman, two men who have every reason to hate him, are circling closer, whispering to each other about ways to neutralize his growing power. Kane, determined to stay ahead of them, contemplates the ultimate act of sabotage, pitting Jack and Victor against one another, rekindling their decades-long animosity, and hoping they destroy each other before they can unify against him. Back in Sharon's orbit, the conversation between her and Tessa grows more raw, more pressing, as Tessa admits she has no clue what she's stepping into by pursuing the hotel lead but feels morally obligated to dig deeper for Mariah's sake. Sharon, her maternal instincts blazing, urges Tessa to slow down and reconsider, warning her that Phyllis doesn't share information without a reason and that any truth Phyllis leaks could come with an explosive cost. But Tessa, stubborn in her conviction, confesses that with Daniel by her side she feels braver, more capable of surviving whatever darkness lies ahead, though even as she says it, she recognizes the shadow of temptation Daniel still carries for her, and Sharon immediately notices the flicker in her tone. Could Daniel's involvement be a sign that Phyllis is playing her own long game, baiting Tessa with false promises of answers while quietly pushing Daniel into her orbit, knowing Mariah's insecurities could crack her marriage in two? Sharon's silence, heavy and deliberate, tells Tessa everything. If she goes down this road, she risks not only uncovering truths too heavy to bear but also losing Mariah in the process. As the week hurtles forward, every thread, Phyllis taking charge of Kane's war against Billy, Kane plotting chaos between Jack and Victor, Tessa readying to dive into the dangerous shadows of the hotel with Daniel at her side, and Sharon quietly bracing for the implosion she feels coming, tightens into a web where one misstep could bring down the entire fragile balance in Genoa City. Tessa's heart pounded in her chest as she sat across from Sharon at Crimson Lights, her fingers wrapped so tightly around her coffee mug that her knuckles turned white. The little cafe had always been a sanctuary for Sharon's loved ones, but today it felt more like a confession booth, a place where secrets weren't so much spilled as dragged out, reluctant and dangerous. Sharon leaned in, her eyes soft yet alert, sensing the magnitude of what Tessa was about to reveal. "You don't look like you've slept in days," Sharon murmured, her tone carrying both concern and quiet authority. Tessa gave a shaky laugh, then exhaled. "That's because I haven't." "Sharon. I found out something about Phyllis, something she's been holding on to. And I can't keep it to myself anymore." Sharon's lips pressed together in that familiar way that said she was bracing herself, ready to absorb whatever storm was coming. "Phyllis always has something up her sleeve," Sharon replied cautiously, "but if it's enough to keep you this rattled, then it's serious." "Tell me." Tessa hesitated, her voice trembling as she explained that Phyllis had been digging around the very same hotel where Mariah's spinout began. "She knows more about that night than she's letting on," Tessa said, her eyes darting around the cafe as if the walls themselves might be listening. "She has documents, files, connections that could prove who orchestrated it all. But she's keeping it close, Sharon. Too close. And I can't help but wonder, why? Why sit on something like this unless she's planning to use it to her advantage?" Sharon's pulse quickened, though she remained outwardly calm. She had danced with Phyllis's manipulations enough times to know that whenever Phyllis held a piece of dangerous information, it was never out of compassion or justice, it was always leverage. "So she told you?" Sharon asked carefully. Tessa nodded. "She told me enough to make me think she has the missing puzzle piece. But she also made it clear that if I wanted to dig deeper, I'd be walking into a mess she couldn't protect me from." Sharon set her cup down with deliberate calm, her eyes searching Tessa's face. "And yet here you are, ready to dive headfirst into that very mess." Tessa's voice broke as she confessed, "Because I have to. Sharon, Mariah is slipping away from me. She doesn't trust herself, she doesn't trust me, and this could be the only way to bring her back, to show her that I'm fighting for us. If it means going into that hotel and digging up what Phyllis won't share, then I have to do it." Sharon reached across the table, gripping Tessa's hand with the firm touch of a mother guiding a frightened daughter. "You think this is about saving Mariah, but it's about more than that. This is about you proving your worth to yourself. And that's dangerous, Tessa. Because Phyllis doesn't hand out breadcrumbs unless she's laying a trap." The mention of Phyllis spun Sharon's mind back to Kane, because she knew, everyone knew, that Phyllis was now orbiting around Kane's world in ways that could only spell trouble. Kane, meanwhile, sat in his office at Chancellor Winters, staring at the pile of contracts he'd been too distracted to read. Michael Baldwin's dismissal had thrown his plans into chaos, and though he had been counting on Michael to be his shield against Billy Abbott's relentless pursuit, now that shield was gone. Phyllis, however, had swooped in like a hawk sensing vulnerability, offering herself as Kane's new strategist. Kane wasn't blind, he knew Phyllis didn't offer loyalty for free. She wanted a seat at his table because she had her own enemies to neutralize, and Billy Abbott just happened to be the perfect target. In their last meeting, Phyllis had leaned across Kane's desk, her red hair catching the light, her tone smooth and silky as she whispered, "Let me handle Billy. He's a man who still thinks with his heart, and hearts are easy to break when you know where the cracks are." Michael was too ethical, too hesitant. "You need someone who's not afraid to get their hands dirty." "That's me, Kane." Kane had stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, knowing she wasn't wrong. Billy was predictable in his emotions, and Phyllis had always been a master at twisting emotions until they strangled. Still, Kane's paranoia wouldn't let him rest. He had begun to hear whispers, Victor Newman meeting privately with Jack Abbott, both men suddenly interested in Kane's recent business expansions. Kane had always prided himself on staying one step ahead, but if Victor and Jack were banding together, it could spell the end of everything he'd built. As if summoned by the tension, Victor himself appeared later that day in Jack's office. "We have a problem," Victor rumbled, his voice carrying the weight of decades of wars fought and won. Jack, leaning against his desk with arms folded, raised an eyebrow. "For once, Victor, we actually agree. Kane Ashby is making moves, and if we don't stop him, he'll be carving up Genoa City like it's his personal chessboard." The two men, old enemies bound by grudging respect, exchanged a look that was almost feral in its intensity. They were not allies by choice, but by necessity, and Kane was about to learn what it meant to be hunted by predators who had perfected the art of war long before he ever arrived in their city. Meanwhile, Sharon's conversation with Tessa continued to unravel layers neither of them wanted to face. Tessa admitted that Daniel Romalotti Jr. had offered to accompany her to the hotel, to help her piece together whatever Phyllis had hinted at. "He said he doesn't want me to go in alone," Tessa whispered, guilt lacing her tone. Sharon's brows furrowed, concern flickering in her eyes. "Daniel has history with you, Tessa. And history has a way of resurfacing when two people are in close quarters, especially under stress." Tessa shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, Sharon, it's not like that. He's just a friend, someone who wants to help." But Sharon wasn't convinced. She knew Daniel's soft spot for Tessa, and she also knew how easily a wounded heart like Mariah's could interpret even the faintest sign of betrayal. "You think you're saving your marriage," Sharon said, her voice heavy with warning, "but you might be putting it in more danger than ever. If Mariah finds out you're working with Daniel behind her back, it could shatter what little trust is left between you." Tessa looked down, her throat tight, knowing Sharon was right but feeling powerless to stop herself. "I just want to fix this," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Sharon squeezed her hand again. "Then fix it by being honest. Don't let Phyllis be the wedge that drives you and Mariah apart. Because trust me, Phyllis would love nothing more than to light that fire and watch the fallout." At the very same moment, Phyllis sat in her suite at the Grand Phoenix, scrolling through documents on her laptop. A sly smile tugged at her lips as she read over the reports she had acquired from a confidential source. There were names, dates, transactions, all linked to the night of Mariah's spinout. Phyllis had the power to blow the story wide open, but instead of doing that, she tucked the evidence away in a hidden folder. Information was her currency, and she would never spend it all in one place. Her phone buzzed, and she smirked as she saw Kane's name flash across the screen. "Time to stir the pot," she muttered, answering with her trademark confidence. "Kane, darling, I've got something you'll want to hear. And trust me, it's going to make Billy Abbott's life very complicated." In Genoa City, the players were aligning, secrets were stacking higher, and the ground beneath everyone's feet was starting to tremble. Sharon could sense the storm coming. Tessa was on the brink of a dangerous choice, Phyllis was tightening her grip on Kane's schemes, and Kane himself was preparing to pit Jack and Victor against each other in a war that could consume them all. Approached, the question wasn't whether explosions would rock Genoa City, but who would still be standing when the smoke cleared. Kane sat alone in the Chancellor Winter's boardroom, the blinds drawn, his hands drumming impatiently against the polished table. For a man who prided himself on control, the sudden collapse of his arrangement with Michael Baldwin gnawed at him in ways he couldn't fully admit. He had counted on Michael's legal expertise to shield him from the fallout of his maneuvers against Billy Abbott, but Michael had chosen his conscience over Kane's money, and Kane hated nothing more than disloyalty. The sound of stilettos clicking against the marble floor broke his brooding silence. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. "You look like a man who just lost his best weapon," Phyllis purred, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she sauntered into the room. She tossed her crimson hair over one shoulder and dropped a thick folder onto the table. "Lucky for you, I happen to be very good at improvising." Kane eyed her warily. "Improvising or self-serving?" he asked. Phyllis gave a slow smile, sliding into the chair across from him. "Why not both? Look, you need someone who understands Billy, how he thinks, what drives him, and most importantly, what breaks him. I've been in Billy's orbit for years, Kane. I know his weaknesses better than anyone." She tapped the folder. "And I've got receipts to back it up." Kane leaned forward, curiosity winning over caution. "What is this?" Phyllis leaned in close, her eyes gleaming. "It's everything Billy doesn't want the world to know. Gambling slips, late-night wire transfers, even a few compromising photos from his Vegas trips. If we play this right, we won't just neutralize him. We'll bury him." Kane's lips curled into a rare smile, though suspicion still lingered. "Why are you doing this, Phyllis? What's in it for you?" Phyllis crossed her legs and gave him a look that was both playful and deadly serious. "Let's just say I'm tired of Billy skating by while I'm painted as the villain. He ruins lives, Kane, but somehow he always gets a redemption arc. Not this time. This time, I'll write the ending." Kane chuckled darkly. "And here I thought you were all about redemption these days." Phyllis smirked. "Redemption is overrated. Winning is better." Across town, Sharon was doing her best to contain her growing unease as she listened to Tessa outline her plan. "You don't understand, Sharon," Tessa insisted, her voice urgent. "This hotel, it's the key. Something happened there, something that pushed Mariah over the edge. And Phyllis knows more than she's saying." Sharon folded her arms, her tone steady but laced with concern. "Phyllis always knows more than she says. That doesn't mean you should follow her breadcrumbs. That woman thrives on chaos. If you let her guide you, you'll end up lost in the very storm she created." Tessa shook her head. "I can't just sit back and do nothing. Mariah deserves answers. We deserve answers." Sharon studied Tessa carefully. "You keep saying we, but you're the one chasing this. Mariah hasn't asked you to dig, has she?" Tessa faltered, guilt flashing across her face. "No, but she's hurting, Sharon. And she won't admit it. She thinks if she ignores it, the pain will just go away. But I see her breaking a little more every day. If I don't step in, who will?" Sharon sighed, her maternal instincts torn between admiration for Tessa's devotion and fear for her recklessness. "What about Daniel? You really think dragging him into this won't complicate things?" Tessa bit her lip, torn. "Daniel offered to help. He knows the hotel better than anyone, and I trust him." Sharon's expression hardened. "You trust him. But does Mariah trust him? Or you, when you're with him?" The question cut Tessa to the bone. Memories of her complicated past with Daniel surfaced, the late-night songwriting sessions, the easy laughter, the sparks they both pretended weren't there. "It's not like that anymore," Tessa said quickly, but her defensive tone betrayed her own doubts. Sharon leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Intentions don't matter, Tessa. Perception does. And if Mariah perceives that you're turning to Daniel instead of her, this investigation won't save your marriage. It'll end it." Tessa's throat tightened, but she pressed on. "I have to risk it. If I don't, Mariah will never heal." Sharon's silence was heavy, her instincts screaming that Phyllis had orchestrated this perfectly, dangling just enough truth in front of Tessa to lure her into danger while planting Daniel squarely in the middle of her marriage.